So this unit is CUA PPR 613, Engage in the Business of Creative Practice. This particular unit is a advanced diploma unit. So it's one that most diploma or certificate 4 students are not going to have. But there is quite a lot of information in this unit that just relates generally to kind of taking your creative practice as an artist more seriously and kind of looking at it in a more professional way. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about today include setting goals for yourself as a professional artist, researching and exploiting different kinds of opportunities, and broadening your understanding of available creative opportunities and possibilities. So there are units in Diploma and Certificate 4, which are develop self as artist and develop own sustainable professional practice. So both of those units sort of deal with similar kinds of topics, similar kind of concepts. But this at the advanced diploma level, generally it's kind of understood that you would be working more towards being a kind of like a working professional rather than someone who's sort of still a student or a hobbyist, someone who's actually taking it quite seriously and trying to make a business out of it. Now, everyone is going to have their own specific kinds of goals and their own specific things that they want to do with their art practice. Not everyone wants to be a fine artist, or even if you do want to be a fine artist, there might be sort of other goals that you have as well beyond being a fine artist. And it's also worth knowing, and this is part of what we'll talk about today as well, that there are lots and lots of different kinds of opportunities that you can look at. And you might be sort of surprised at how many different opportunities or different areas of work require an understanding or technical artistic skills. So it's sort of worth thinking about, even at this early stage for some of you, of kind of where you want to go and maybe doing some research and looking into what are the possibilities. So let's get stuck in. First and foremost, first element 1 of this unit is to develop and apply professional work practices. So first thing to talk about, first thing to think about is, what does a good work ethic look like? And so this can be applied pretty broadly to any kind of job. Doesn't have to be specific to, being an artist. But let's just sort of spitball some of the things that you think of when you think of, someone with a good work ethic. What are some of the qualities of someone who has, in your opinion, a good work ethic? What would those be? Just throw some out there for me. Morning, Bhavani. Morning, Jane.
I'll suggest good time management.
Good time management. Yes, excellent. Arrow has said organised. Yep. So being organised, good time management, those are sort of related, but also could be viewed separately as well. What other things?
The most important thing is setting the realistic work expectations and delivering what has been promised. This is very important.
That is, absolutely. That's a really good one. And I think it's certainly, and this is maybe a sort of a continuing conversation or another kind of aspect of that conversation too. It's one of the reasons why I always recommend that people have contracts, especially in our industry. There's a lot of times that you will be doing things like commissions or doing work that's sort of like a one-off type of work, meaning, you might be doing a picture book, for example, or you might be doing a series of illustrations, or you might be doing a commission or whatever it is. Anytime you have any kind of work for hire like that, it's always important to have a contract. And the purpose of the contract is not so that you can get one over on the other person, or that someone else can get one over on you. The purpose of the contract is exactly as Bhavani said. It's basically stating what is everyone expecting to happen. What are the deadlines in terms of when those things need to happen? What's the expectation of what you will deliver or produce or do, and what happens if you don't meet deadlines or if it doesn't meet the expectations of the other person. So contracts are there to protect both parties and make sure that everyone is on the same page, and everyone understands what they should be doing. So very much that's a really good point, is knowing what the job is and knowing how you need to meet the criteria of that job, and being realistic in terms of what your capabilities are. That's a good work ethic. Sophie said cleaning workspaces somewhat often. Yeah, I think so. Again, sort of related to maybe staying organized, but yeah, making sure that you're neat and tidy, and that your workspace isn't just getting filthy and overrun and disorganized. What else? Have we got any other sort of ideas, any other things that you think of? And I mean, it can sort of help to also think about what's a poor work ethic, and so what would be the opposite of that. So like an example of poor work ethic would be missing deadlines, and failing to deliver the things that you've said you're going to do. And so the positive flip on that, the good work ethic version of that, would be meeting deadlines and delivering things as expected. So can we think of any other examples?
Maybe just being careful with the materials you use and not wasting stuff.
Yep, not wasting things. That's certainly a good work ethic. Well, let's have a look at this is sort of just some of the things that I think about, a bit of a list of professional expectations. So things that you should be good at, or you should try and do or deliver, and then what other people might expect. So some professional expectations: you should be a good communicator, should demonstrate consistency, have good time management. We did mention that one. Set and reach realistic goals, and having good follow through. We also mentioned that one. Be punctual. Know your limits and boundaries. So know what you can and can't do, know what you're capable of. And be able to say no. So have confidence and be assertive. Also be approachable, polite, and kind. So those are all some fairly general professional expectations, but certainly ones that we could apply to just working with others in many different areas, including within our fields. What others could or can expect of you is that you would follow through and you'll reach deadlines, that you'll be efficient, you will have high quality or an expected level of quality, that you're genuinely interested in the perspective, the thought, and the creative vision of the person that you're working with or people you're working with, that you'll have contingencies and problem-solving skills, that you will be offered fair compensation, and that you'll have honesty, transparency, and integrity. Did anyone want to add any to that list? Any other things that you might have thought of while we were going through that?
Something about being respectful to other artists and not being competitive. I don't quite know how to word it, but not criticizing your colleagues and sort of being collegiate with other artists and not compete against them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one, and that's a really important one as well. It's certainly, and I've sort of spoken about this before, maybe a little while ago though, but I'm always very, very conscious of and very wary of the race to the bottom that artists, as a bit of a trap that artists and other sort of creative professionals can fall into. And specifically the one that I do see fairly regularly is people undercutting each other. So in terms of being, courteous and being considerate of other artists and being respectful of other artists, there's an amount of doing that just generally, like as you said, Jane, not bad mouthing other artists, not bad mouthing, their artworks or their productions or dragging them down. But another sort of substantial portion of that is also not undercutting other artists. So if you have someone who comes to you with a commission, and the commission, it's a portrait commission or something, and they say to you, well, I was thinking of going with, let's say, for example, Sophie. In the group chat here, Sophie had commissioned me to do a portrait of her, and then she's gone to Jane and said, hey, look, I'm looking for an artist to do a portrait commission. Krista has said that she'll do it for $400. How much will you do it for? And then Jane says, oh, well, I'll do it for $200. And then Sophie comes back to me and says, well, Jane's going to do it for $200. And if I'm in a panic, I might say, oh, I'll do it for $100. I'll do it for $50. And ultimately, all that does is undercut and diminish the value of everybody's art. So we, as a group of artists, as a culture of artists, we have to also be prepared to put up boundaries when it comes to pricing and when it comes to undercutting each other. Because fundamentally, if we all play that game, at the end of the day, no one can afford to be an artist. No one can actually be a working professional artist, because none of us will be, making enough money to actually support ourselves. We'll end up spending more money on materials, and, spending our own money developing our skills and pouring our own time into it, and then getting compensated next to nothing for the effort that we've put in. And people will try and get you to undercut other artists, and as much as it might be tempting, especially when you're just starting off, just remember that it's not just about you. It's not just about that one artist that you're undercutting. It's the entire industry that you're undercutting. And so we do have a certain responsibility to the art world for us to continue to be valued as artists, and for our artworks to continue to be valued. We have a responsibility to put an appropriate price on things and stand firm on those prices. So there's been many times in the past where even though I've wanted the job of, financially, I would have benefited from having the job, I've quoted a price, and the person that I've quoted it to has said, no, I want you to do it for cheaper, or I could get it cheaper elsewhere. And I'll say, okay, see you later then. Go and get it cheaper elsewhere. Because I'm not prepared to play that game. If everyone stands firm on the same kind of pricing, then that's the price that it becomes, and that's the price that people will pay. I'll give you another example of this, which is outside of the field of art, and it is a bit more niche, but it is a good example. So something else that I do aside from visual art is I do martial arts, and I do specifically Chinese martial arts. And quite often we'll have organizations like the City of Sydney Council will ask us to do performances for things like Chinese New Year. And they have a budget set aside that they will pay for performances. But quite often they'll either try and undercut or negotiate, or you to try and say, oh, but it's a good opportunity for you, and it's good exposure for you, you should do it for free. But we've always tried to push back against that. Now, within our industry, there's a specific type of performance, which is a lion dance performance. And you've probably seen a lion dance performance if you've ever gone to like a cultural celebration or a big restaurant opening or anything. It's people, kung fu artists in costume, and it's like a big lion that one person's in the front, one person's in the back, another group of people are playing drums, and the lion kind of dances around, and it's a great performance. It's really fun to watch. But lion dance performers have a set price, a fixed price that every single lion dance organization, they all charge roughly the same amount of money, which is around about $1,000 to $1,500 per performance, regardless of how short the performance is. That's just what everyone charges. And the thing is, when you talk to some of these councils, you'll say, they'll sort of go, we don't have a budget to pay martial arts performances. But if you say to them, well, are you having a lion dance performance? And they say, yes. Well, did you pay the lion dance performers? Well, yes, of course you do, because you have to pay the lion dance performers. So that's, to me, such a great illustrative example of people don't even question paying lion dance performers, because you have to. You cannot get lion dance performers for free unless you yourself own a lion dance performance, troupe. So I think about art in that context quite a lot as well. I think if everyone stands firm, doesn't undercut each other, charges, and it's not to say you have to charge thousands of dollars, but at least if we have some kind of baseline where we're not trying to undercut each other, and we're putting an appropriate base level price on things, then that's what the expectation becomes. And people sort of stop going, oh, well, I can, get people to undercut each other. I can negotiate and get the best price for myself. So Arrow's just commented, another example is sometimes tattoo artists have recommended me other tattoo artists that can do a custom better than they could. Yeah, fantastic. And that's an example of sort of the opposite thing of rather than just not undercutting each other, but actually supporting each other, recognizing your own kind of strengths and weaknesses, and being able to say, hey, I'm not a specialist in this specific area, but such and such person is. And certainly that's something that even within the school, myself and the other tutors will do with and for each other. So if there was a situation where someone came to me and said that they wanted some printmaking work done, I wouldn't try and do it because I don't understand it. I don't do it. But I would recommend Peter, because I know that he's extremely good and he's an expert at it. And I've had people recommend me for illustration work, because like Christina Rogers, she doesn't do illustration work herself. And she's had people try and commission her to do illustration work, and she's recommended me instead. And the more you do that kind of thing, the more it fosters good relationships between yourself and other artists. The more supportive we are of each other, the better the industry becomes as well. So really important. Final thing that I'm going to say on that really is, especially when we're pricing our art, and that's a very long conversation talking about pricing art, which we will touch on later on today. But something that I do think about all the time is, someone paid an unbelievably stupid amount of money for a banana gaffer tape to a wall. So the next time you're thinking about, gee, I wonder if this picture that I've done is worth $200, just remember the art industry is pretty variable when it comes to pricing of artwork, and your work is worth, what you think it's worth. You don't need to discount yourself, because you can tape a banana to a wall and get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to it if you're the right kind of person in the right kind of situation. All right, so very good. Thinking about those professional expectations. Let's have a discussion then about interviewing creative professionals. Now, this is a component part of a couple of different units of competency. So it is a part of this particular unit of competency, but I also think it's part of one of the diploma level ones, because I had quite a few people ask me about it, including Aoife. But I've got a little video here to have a look at, and I'll come back to this particular artist here, Wayne Haag, in a second, but we'll just have a quick look at this video, and we'll come back.
Well, entire life, so it has never seemed. I have lived in a creative household for, well, my entire life, so it has never seemed impossible to go down a creative path. But I've come to realize that many people hold back or are held back from venturing into a creative industry because it doesn't seem supportive or a real job. I'm here to prove that wrong as I meet people doing their thing, working in creative jobs and surviving, who would have thought, and hopefully I'm able to show all of you that it is possible to do whatever you want. My first interviewee, Emily Kennel, works at the National Gallery of Victoria as a curatorial programs officer for audience engagement, as well as being a writer and arts professional from Canada, so she is obviously lovely. Graduating in 2014 from the University of Toronto with a Masters of Art History, Emily then moved to Tasmania with her now husband and then to Melbourne, where she now has to deal with me.
So audience engagement essentially it works on anything, touches on anything in a museum that has to do with the visitor experience. So that includes our front of house department. We handle ticketing, calls, emails from members of the public. It works with our public programs department, so the Friday nights program, they have the public lectures, and it also covers our members department, the members lounge, all of the members programming, and then our children and families and access program, as well as our sort of school learning program. So, and including that, anything within the gallery that is sensory. So if we have an artwork that you could touch, or that, you know, during triennial you could smell, this is full lessons work, anything that's sort of attractive in that way, we have a hand in.
You studied in Canada.
I did, yeah.
And you did art history?
I did, yeah.
How does that intertwine into your job now?
Working for such an amazing institution, you really do need to get to know collection, and I'm excited, you know, because it is an international collection, that some of my strengths are already there. But what drew me to this job was I've always felt that, you know, art should be for everyone, and I find that often the way we talk about art, especially within academia, it's not very accessible, and especially being passionate about contemporary art, which a lot of people don't see as being for themselves.
It's kind of like a no job as well.
Exactly. But contemporary art is about our contemporary world, so it should be the easiest for people to understand. So I wanted to help make that happen.
How do you kind of connect with the teens, and so are you kind of working with younger people to draw them into the gallery?
Yeah, definitely. So we've found it's hard to pull those audiences in. So we want the teams to do it for us. So we do have a team council that I work with. We meet once a month, and we look at programs coming up, especially our art party events. We do want the team council to do a lot for us.
How do you get involved into the team council?
It's application based. So we sort of piloted the program 2 years ago, and then this year we opened up for applications. And we received a lot more.
A lot? What do you look for in those applications?
There's a few things we look for. We received, you know, all of the applications we received were strong, and what they all had in common was an interest in the arts and a passion for the NGV, which is really exciting. What I was looking for were evidence of, you know, teamwork. We want people who can work together, the team, evidence of sort of extracurricular activities. It doesn't need to be art based. In general, working for the NGV, we look for experience anywhere. So yes, I studied, and yes, I did my master's, but I think one of my main strengths is work experience that I've built up. So my greatest piece of advice to anyone looking to work in the arts, like, we're aware there are a lot of jobs going on. You just need to be willing to put your hand up for anything. So volunteer wherever you can, run clubs, run organizations, even while you're studying, have a blog like you do, be ambitious, be self-starting, and work as much as you can, do as much as you can at the same time as you're sort of progressing in your direction. And never think that, you know, anything's not quite right for you or beneath you, or, you know, not exactly on your one pathway. Because I can guarantee you that it's not really a straight line. You'll do a lot of this. And you never know what meeting or what moment will help launch you into something that's really exciting.
Oh, okay.
I think that it's hard.
Georgia Logan is a recent communications graduate from Deakin University and majored in public relations with experience in publicity and communications within the arts sector. Learning that media and public affairs isn't about Instagram, I was curious to know what Georgia gets up to on her day-to-day.
Ever changing. As
Yeah.
I mentioned, I just spent all morning offsite doing an interview with interior designers for the redesign prize, which is opening in a few months. But it kind of will range from being on a photo shoot, doing interviews, writing, talking to journalists. Like, it literally varies, like, day to day.
How has media and communications kind of changed in the NGV? Because I guess, did you used to have films and interviews and stuff? Because I've noticed your YouTube channel,
Yeah,
it's like you're
exactly.
getting
So it's
more
quite,
videos.
I mean, I've only been here a bit over a year, but I think
Uh-huh.
the media landscape in general is changing quite rapidly. Everything's kind of moving to a digital space.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of keeping up with those demands. Like, we still have our print media, obviously, but balancing our print with our digital readership as well. So that's where, like, the great photos and the video content comes in, because I think you can definitely tell a lot of a story in a video.
Yes.
I mean, you
definitely.
can in
love video.
words, but like with the video,
Yeah.
you can literally just make something evolve and just make it flourish. So I think video is quite powerful. But yeah, I think it's going to a media, like, more of an online space. So I interned here in my last year of uni, and then I was doing that while I was studying, and then I started freelancing.
Yeah.
And working here kind of part-time while I finished my studies, and then it turned into a permanent role.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of get into that internship and working part-time now?
It was literally, I think, no matter what you do, like, you need to be very passionate about it.
Yeah.
Like, I think in my last year of uni, I did 3 internships while studying and working. So it was kind of like, I think internships are a great tool in uni, especially to test the waters. But then there's, you've got to balance, like, you've actually got to live your life and make money. So I think giving things a go, if you've done, like, all of my internships were different. So some were internal, some were like external agencies. So kind of keeping that variation and just giving it a go. Like, as soon as I started here, I knew that I loved it. Like, I loved it. I even got here. So it was just putting in all of the energy that I could and really devoting myself to learn as much as I could.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of how I started.
My last interviewee is Elizabeth Gage, a sessional educator at the NGV, with a primary focus to educate through art whilst promoting visual literacy, higher order thinking, communication skills, and enhancing students' understanding of themselves and the real world. We also discovered that we both really like Hake's chocolate.
So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I led a professional learning day for art teachers in the Northwest region. And we were learning about how you can integrate art into other curriculum areas, and also giving them some ideas for their art lessons and their art units as well.
What did you study to get this job?
So I first started doing a Bachelor of Arts. And I double majored in art history and Italian. Yeah, and then after that, I kind of didn't know what to do from there. I was just like, oh, what is there for me to do in Melbourne in relation to art?
That you were thinking of?
I've always wanted to work in an art gallery.
Yeah.
And at that point, because I was so young, I was only 20 at the time, I didn't know how to get into a place like this. And I wish I had a little bit more support and guidance, and I wish I kind of put myself out there a little bit more, but that's okay. I've always loved teaching and working with kids. So I did some volunteer work at a primary school just to see if it was for me, and I loved it.
Yeah.
So after my degree, I then went into doing my diploma in education in primary. Yeah, so then I started, straight after that, I went into a primary school, and I've been teaching for 10 years now.
You weren't doing this job. What job would you choose in the gallery or outside or anywhere?
My absolute dream job, like since I was a kid, was to be an art curator.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's what I always wanted to do. So when I started learning about art in high school, I was always drawn to the theory side. So I loved the practical side of it, but I was always drawn to theory. And I still remember my art teacher. She inspires me to this day. Like, I still remember learning about artists and artworks, and she was just amazing. She was so energetic and really passionate about it.
Do you kind of take that on in your...
I like to think so, yeah. And that's why I went down the art history path rather than the practical side. So I've always wanted to be an art curator. But thinking about my experience so far, I still love working with kids. And I think that's something that I will always do. And I'm passionate about education.
Yeah.
Passionate about art. I'm passionate about inquiry learning. So having been able to merge the three.
Yeah.
It's
Thank you for watching the first episode of I Want Your Job. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
All right. So that's, I mean, some pretty good information in terms of those specific 3 jobs. The requirements of the unit though are that you personally do the interview yourself. So unfortunately you can't just look at an interview that someone else did. You do need to actually conduct the interview yourself. But it's certainly worth just saying that, you know, reaching out to other artists, and I think what you can get even from that video is a lot of artists are pretty friendly people, quite happy to talk about things and talk about, you know, their job and how they got there. If you show interest in who someone is and what they're doing, then often you can sort of start up a conversation. But certainly I'd say, you know, reach for the stars, be ambitious, reach out to someone who you just don't think would get back to you and see what would happen. The worst that can happen is they won't respond. I mean, I remember this was a few years ago now, but we had a couple of students who reached out to Ben Quilty and he replied, and they ended up going to his studio and meeting him and having a really good chat with him. And he's an extremely well-known and renowned Australian artist. So him taking the time out to just help, you know, young artists at the beginning of their own careers was obviously fantastic. But he was someone who they didn't know him at all. They had no contact with him. They just reached out to him and he responded. Aris just said, can it be a small artist? It can, but the questions that are sort of being asked are reasonably specific. So it doesn't need to be a household name, certainly, but it should be someone who is like a working professional artist. And the reason I'm saying all of this is because I think people do lean on the art tutors a little bit, which is not, you know, it's not a big problem, but it does mean that it's a fairly narrow band of artists that you're then going to be talking to. All of us as tutors, and if you do kind of get stuck for people to talk to, then yes, all of us tutors do have our own artistic practices outside of teaching, although we can also talk to you about being a teacher if that's something that you're interested in. But it's worth, you know, finding someone that you admire, or more importantly, who is doing or working in a field that you yourself are interested in kind of moving into. So if you are interested in moving into fine art, then it could be a fine artist. If you're interested in tattoo art and becoming a tattoo artist, then you can interview a tattooist. And again, it doesn't have to be a household name. In fact, it probably won't be. But if there's someone who's been working in the industry for a number of years and that's their job, then they are absolutely a suitable person for you to interview, because ultimately we just want you to be able to, you know, get good and accurate information that is going to help you along your own kind of creative path. And I would certainly say do reach out to more than just 3. 3 is the sort of baseline requirement for the assessment, but that doesn't mean that you can only reach out to 3 people. Try and make contact with as many artists or creative professionals as you certainly can. The reason why I've got this particular example here, Wayne Haag, who is a concept artist and a fine artist, he's someone who has worked on TV and movies for many, many years. And so I've put him here as an example of someone who, when I was wanting to pursue art as a professional practice rather than just kind of a hobby, he was someone who was a friend of a friend, and I reached out to him and asked him essentially, what does it take to do your job? And this had nothing to do with doing a qualification. It was literally just, I wanted to know. So as I say, he did concept art, fine art, or he does concept art and fine art. And at the time he was working for a production company, and he would do primarily he would do matte paintings. Matte paintings are the big, like, huge backgrounds that you often see in movies. This is many, many years ago now. We're talking sort of 15, maybe, gosh, 20 years? No, can't be that long. No, 15-ish years ago. And back then, matte paintings, he would still produce them digitally, but his background, he would actually, way even slightly further back than that, he would hand paint them as well. So movies that he was working on or had worked on were things like Lord of the Rings, and I think Mad Max, and just various things. He also worked for TV, doing commercials and big variety of different kinds of work. And so I emailed him one day and just said, hey, look, I really want to get into, being a creative professional and a professional artist. I know that this is what you do, and I'm very interested in that. What would it take to, work for your company, or to do what you do? And he was extremely generous with his time and his response. He wrote me a really lengthy email in reply, and we ended up having quite a few emails back and forth, just talking about things. And the number one piece of advice that he gave me, he sort of said, first and foremost, is this something you really want to do? And I sort of said, well, I don't know, maybe. What do you mean? And he said, well, look, if you took a step away from thinking about, I want to have a job, if money wasn't the object, if you were financially already independently wealthy, financially stable, and you actually just think about what you want to do as an artist. So forget about the money portion of it, forget about the job portion of it. What do you want to do as an artist? If you didn't have to pay bills, what would you do? And I said, well, actually, something I've always really wanted to do is picture books. I want to do children's book illustration, because that's something that inspired me as a child, made me interested in art in the first place. And I would just love to do it. I'd love to have someone else feel the way that I felt about picture books. And he said, well, just do that then. Forget about doing matte painting, forget about, being involved in the movie industry, because fundamentally, if you aren't super passionate about it, then there's going to be someone else who is more passionate about it and more prepared to put in the long hours and more prepared to go through the endless, doing and redoing and criticism and all the rest of it. And they're always going to outcompete you in terms of the job, because they really love it. They really want it, and you don't. And I thought that was a really great piece of advice, because I think, and I still think, that that's very true. If there's no sort of fire in your belly about doing a specific form of art or a specific creative pursuit, then very quickly it will just become a job. And in the way that he said it, you can wake up after 15 years and realize that you've been doing something, sure, artistic, but you actually don't love it. You hate it, if anything. And it's become tedious, and you dread going to work. And that's not the way you want to feel about your art. And he also sort of pointed out, and maybe this is less true in some ways now than it was back then, but there are so many opportunities, there are so many different ways to be an artist, that you don't have to just pursue one thing. But if you are going to pursue one thing, or at least push yourself down a specific pathway, just make sure that it is something that you really love and you really care about and you really want to do. And so, yeah, that was a fantastic piece of advice, and it did put me on the path to publishing. Now I've published 12 books, currently working on another one. I've hit a moment in my life where I want to pursue other goals. Specifically, I do want to do more fine art, as in sort of bigger works, portraits, paintings of people, that sort of thing. But his advice meant that I spent 10 years developing portfolios, becoming a professional illustrator, and ending up with work that I'm extremely proud of, and I'm very, very happy that I did do that. And could between that and various other things, teaching stained glass, lots of other different sort of creative pursuits. I haven't worked a day job, worked in an office for close to 20 years. No, that's not quite right. 15, at least 15 years, which is great. You know, that's such a wonderful thing to be able to say. So I can very much attest to the power of just shooting out an email to someone and ending up getting really fantastic advice in response. And something that Wayne also said to me at the end of this very long sort of discussion about what to do and where to go and who to be, he also said, just make sure that you, because I was obviously very grateful, and he said, well, just pay it forwards. So, you know, if someone reaches out to you, give them the advice, follow up with them, help them understand how to be the artist that they want to be. And so that's certainly what I've tried to do as well over the years. And I think a lot of artists have that attitude. A lot of artists have been helped by someone at some point, or encouraged, or you know, supported. And we want you to then continue to support other people as well. You know, don't hoard your secrets away from everybody else. So with all of that said, I know that this is something Aoife wanted to talk to me about today, but it's a question I get asked quite a lot, just because I know, as I said, this is something that is in some of our units of competency, is interview a creative professional. Quite a lot of people are interested in becoming illustrators, and illustration covers a fairly broad kind of swathe of you know, different styles of making art. So this is a chance for you to ask the questions that you might have for becoming an illustrator. So obviously I've got some questions here. I think these questions are based on the questions that are in this unit of competency. But if you've got other questions as well, please do let me know. Before I get into these questions, maybe Aoife, if you want to go ahead and ask the questions that you've got, and then if we don't cover them, I'll answer these questions as well.
Okay. Sorry, just reading my stuff.
That's all right.
I think my main question about being an illustrator is mainly just, how do you find clients?
Yeah, good question. So I sort of mentioned that being an illustrator can be quite broad in terms of, you know, there's lots of fields that require illustration. And in your email, you also said, you know, would you kind of classify tattoo as being like a form of illustration? And I think you could certainly define it in that way. I think that it's you know, it's not necessarily exclusively that, but there is a strong component part of tattooing that requires, you know, strong drawing skills and a variety of skills, and working essentially on commission. So I do think it's easy enough to kind of slot it in with illustration. So when it comes to then getting clients, it kind of depends on which industry or which segment of commercial art and illustration you're wanting to kind of go into. But fundamentally, I think across the board, it's generally got to do with developing a portfolio, and then approaching the people who have the work with your portfolio and letting them know that you have availability. So you can certainly be using your own sort of social media to be getting one-off clients. You know, say that you're available for work, put up examples of your work on, you know, an Instagram profile, or, you know, TikTok, or whatever it might be, and let people know that they can hire you for specific illustrations. In the past, I've never actually like trained to be a tattoo artist, but I've designed a number of tattoos for people. And a lot of those were people who already knew me, so they, you know, might have been friends of mine or friends of friends. And a lot of those commissions just came out of me literally just posting on my Instagram saying, hey, if anyone's looking for a commission, I'm available right now. And people would, you know, DM me, not necessarily everyone, it's not as flooded, but it would, every time I would post that, I'd get 1 or 2 people sort of asking for, yeah, I have been thinking about getting this or that done. You know, can you do that for me? So utilizing the contacts you already have, I think you would be surprised at how many people, like you might sort of think, oh, well, why is no one asking me right now? You know, isn't it obvious that I'm available for commission? No, not necessarily. The amount of times that I've sort of thought that and then posted something saying, hey, I'm available, and people go, oh, great, I've been wanting to ask you for a while, but I assumed you were really busy. So don't discount just the networks of people that you have, and just literally saying the words, I'm available. You might be surprised at what sort of work comes in. But the second part is certainly developing a portfolio. And so the area that I can speak most confidently to is picture book and book illustration. So primarily picture books for, you know, children, but I have done some commissions for even young reader illustrations as well. I've also done card games. I've done a couple of things like album covers and t-shirt designs for bands as well. And particularly when it comes to the publishing industry, picture books, it's a matter of putting together a portfolio. And I would say a good baseline is to have something like 20 illustrations, 20 examples of your best work, and then make a list of different organizations, companies, publishers, if it's publishing industry you're wanting to get into, that are accepting submissions. And a lot of publishers don't accept unsolicited manuscripts. So unsolicited means that it's coming from the general public. A solicited manuscript would be coming from an agent. So writers have it much tougher than artists. Writers usually, like a big publishing house, let's say something like Random House. Random House would have a very, very small window that they accept unsolicited manuscripts. And this information is available on their websites. And it would say, you know, for authors, in fact, let's have a look. We'll be able to find it. We'll be able to show you. So let's say Random House. How can I get published? Thank you for your interest. Complete your manuscript or proposal. Blah, 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 blah. Find a literary agent. Most publishers, including Random House, have not accepted unagented submissions, in large part because an agent plays a critical role. So there you go. Next step is to create a query letter and synopsis for your book. Collaborate with your literary agent to prepare your work. Hopefully land a book deal. So these guys don't accept unsolicited manuscripts. So you have to go through a literary agent. Now, if we are looking at, let's go back, let's say, so what would be Scholastic? Scholastic do more picture books. So if we said Scholastic Illustrator, submissions. So at this stage, we are not accepting submissions for unsolicited manuscripts or artwork portfolios. If you'd like assistance with the writing process, so these are writing centers. So Scholastic is closed. That's interesting. Didn't know that. What would be another picture book publisher is trying to think who the big ones out there now. Say Little Bear, maybe. Hardy Grant, that's what I'm thinking of. So Hardy Grant Publishing, blah, blah, blah. We publish books, submissions for any Hardy Grant Publishing imprint from writers and illustrators from marginalized. So this is who they're currently accepting submissions for. So writers and illustrators from marginalized backgrounds and communities, picture books from author illustrator only. So meaning you are both the author and the illustrator. and graphic novels of all ages. So then you go down to here, submission guidelines. For writers and illustrators from marginalized backgrounds, welcome submissions about any subject matter, etc., etc. No word count. If you don't meet these guidelines, you'll not be submitted. So it looks like this Heidi grant is only accepting if you're not from a marginalized background or community, then you'd have to be an author illustrator. So that would be putting together a story as well with your manuscript and including 2 full bleed illustrations. This is an organization I've worked with before, as Little Steps. If you're an illustrator interested in working on Little Steps books, please get in touch. First name, last name, phone, email, cover letter, upload your portfolio. How did you hear about us, and so on. So kind of doing your research in terms of, I'll come back to that. So Eve has just said, I've got some questions about being an art teacher, where to start with that, any advice? Okay, I'll come back to that. And Jane said, is it worth trying to write your own book with illustrations and then trying to get it published? All right, let me answer that as well in a second. So in terms of, I guess, the sort of step 1, and this is essentially what I did, is creating a portfolio of illustrations. And that's without, if you haven't had anything published, then that's going to be random illustrations essentially. So, but you want to have it in a specific look, like a specific style to the way that you work. They need to be consistent. They need to be of high quality. I'd put together, or I'd plan to have maybe 20 to 25 illustrations. And the reason I say that many is not that you will always submit that many, but because depending on the publisher, you may need to slightly curate your portfolio, because some publishers are going to have, most of their picture books are about people, kids, children, or whatever. Other publishers, most of their picture books are about animals. Other publishers, maybe most of their picture books are, quite simple and basic, just colors and shapes. So you might, when you're looking at a specific publisher, you might say, okay, for this publisher, I'm going to put together all the ones that I have that are about like nature and animals. For this publisher, I'm going to put together all of the illustrations I have about children and, families. Then go to their website, figure out what are their submission guidelines, and submit to them. Now, for picture book illustrations and just book illustrations in general, there's a good chance you won't hear back for a while. You might hear back from them to say, thank you for your submission. We'll be in touch if there's anything suitable. But what's worth knowing is that in the publishing industry, especially with picture books, the lead time is quite long, meaning that they've already planned what books they're going to publish for the next probably 12 months. So even if they really love your work, if they put you on a book, it's going to have to be a new book. And it's not going to come out for 12 months, probably at minimum, unless there's, I don't know, some major event that's just happened. They really want to push a book out fast. But most of the time, you'll be waiting for them to find the right story that's going to suit your illustrations, and then they'll get in touch. And so it is a bit of a waiting game. It's certainly not something that happens fast. When it comes to other industries, as I said, I'm not an expert in those other industries, but for things like working in tattoo, working in a tattoo studio, for example, they often want to see portfolios as well. So having a portfolio of your work that shows your style, shows that you are consistent within your style, shows that all of your work is of a high quality, that's really important in developing a good portfolio. It's better to have less images that are of a very high quality and very consistent than everything that you've ever done and it's all over the place in terms of consistency or quality. So keep that in your mind as well. Now, in terms of answering the other two questions, so is it worth trying to write your own book with illustrations and then trying to get published? Jane asked that question. Yes, it is. If you have a good manuscript idea, publishers are more interested in working with author illustrators because it's sort of less work for them. They only have to deal with one person instead of two people. What I would suggest to you is that the majority of publishers will want a full manuscript and then some sample images. So I wouldn't go ahead and illustrate the entire book as well. I would have your manuscript and then do like, and it was, I think in the, which was a Hardy Grant, it said two illustrations. That's about right. So 2 illustrations to kind of show your style and to show what you're kind of thinking in terms of the illustrations. You could also maybe submit storyboards, which kind of show page to page how it's going to look, particularly if there's not a lot of text and you want to give a sense of, you know, what is supposed to be visually told as part of the story. So a really good example of that is there's a book called, what's it called? Something Looking for Crabs, maybe, or Searching for Crabs. Let me see if I can find it. It's an older book. Yes. So Bruce Whaley. If anyone's read this book, has anyone read this book? As I say, it's a bit old. So my generation of picture books. But the premise of Looking for Crabs is that it's like a family that they've gone out to gone out to the beach, and they're everywhere that they look, the main character keeps saying he can't find any crabs, but throughout all of the illustrations, there are crabs like legitimately everywhere. So they keep sort of looking and saying, oh, can't find any crabs, can't find any crabs. But, you know, as the illustration on the front cover of it, there's a crab on his head, and everywhere they look, there are crabs sort of hiding quite close by. So when Bruce Watley put together his submission for this, and I don't know this is a fact, but actually, no, I do know this is a fact. I spoke to the editor who worked on it. But anyway, his manuscript had a lot of kind of illustration notes, and he also did storyboards to demonstrate that even though the text says there are no crabs, there are actually crabs throughout. And that's kind of the, you know, the joke or the premise of the thing. So yeah, if you're wanting to write and illustrate your own picture book, I think it's a great idea. It's sort of something that I just, for me, never quite got around to. I just illustrated other people's books, even though I did have some ideas. But you should definitely hone the text, make sure that you have complete text, and then just do a couple of sample illustrations. You don't need to do all of your illustrations. And if you are going to do it that way too, I would submit in your cover letter, say that you're also available for other illustration projects, because why not? It's worth letting them know that if they aren't in love with your story, but they really love your illustrations, that they can still use you for other work as well. Cool. Was there any more questions? Been signed out. Was there any more questions about illustration? Because I'll answer some of the other questions as well. But unless there's more specific questions.
I'll just say it because it's easier than typing. For me anyway. Is there any preferred medium? Like, I know your book, you did watercolor.
Yeah.
But do publishers prefer any particular medium?
No, what they will require pretty much all the time now, though, is digital images. So the sort of industry standard is that you provide digital images that are print ready, which generally means 300 DPI, CMYK format. If there's any kind of text components, the texts are on a separate layer. And yeah, so these days. It used to be the case sort of 20, 25 years ago that if you did, say, watercolor illustrations, you could send your originals to the publisher. They would do a high resolution scan, send the originals back to you, and then use those. But these days they don't. These days, every publisher that I work with wants digital images. So however you produce those images is up to you, but you have to give them digital images at the end. And digital images have to be very high quality. So they can't just be like a high resolution photograph. That's not considered high standard enough. So it would need to be scanned.
Okay.
So in terms of, I guess, just quickly going through these questions here, how I transitioned into the line of work and what was required of me. I've kind of answered that a little bit. So transitioning into the line of work was, yeah, essentially making the decision that that's what I wanted to pursue. And so devoting more time to developing my portfolio, working on illustration ideas, researching which publishers, like what publishers are out there that are producing books. And that research, I was actually even just physical research. I would go into bookshops and basically just scour the shelves and just see, okay, what publishers' names am I seeing over and over again? I wrote a list, made like a spreadsheet of all of the publishers, then went to all of those publishers' websites, found their submission, whether they were open for submissions or not. If they were open for submissions, what were the requirements? Then put together portfolios based on that. When I started this as well, which was, as I say, about sort of 12 years ago, some of the publishers that I applied to actually wanted physical copies of a manuscript as well. So not manuscript, sorry, portfolio. So I had to print out high resolution images of my illustrations and put those into a folder and actually physically post them off to the publisher. So things have changed now. Pretty much everyone just wants digital stuff, which is good because it saves money and paper and what have you. But that was the process that I kind of went into. And that was sort of the things that were required of me is putting in that time and effort, making sure that I've got a broad range of skills, and making sure that I've developed a kind of consistent style, but also being able to be flexible enough that if I get a request for something that is a bit different, that I can also kind of, produce that work or learn the ways to do that work. My advice and recommendations for anyone who wants to become an illustrator is certainly, at the beginning, you've got to be pretty patient. Don't expect the offers to just start rolling in immediately. Also, you've got to be able to handle criticism, because you're not always going to get it right straight away. And being able to work with a publisher, work with an author, bring their ideas and their vision to life. It takes time and it takes work. And sometimes you might do something that you think, oh, this is the best illustration I've ever done. And then the feedback you get is, oh, we hate it. It doesn't work at all. And I've never had anything quite that extreme happen to me, but I've certainly had confusing criticism, that I found difficult to understand or didn't really know how to address. So it can be quite frustrating. It can be quite challenging, but you've got to have a pretty thick skin as well and be able to let go of the work and understand that it's a collaborative process, and you can't have too much of an ego. You can't be too precious about what you've done. You also need to be consistent, deliver on time, and be consistent is also not just be consistent in your communication, your interpersonal skills, but be consistent in your illustration skills. So it's no good if you're drawing a character and the character looks one way on page 1 and then looks completely different by page 12. And that's even small details as well, making sure that if they've got a specific kind of haircut, that the haircut is consistent, or if they've got a specific t-shirt that they're supposed to be wearing, that they're wearing the same t-shirt in each panel, each picture. You've got to have a pretty broad knowledge of things like perspective, proportion, you know, being able to draw lots of different things. So the example that I've got here is like a, you know, big bear and a little kid's knitting a rainbow scarf together. And that, so what's involved in just this picture is being able to effectively draw a tree, effectively draw a bear, effectively draw a person, effectively draw people or characters looking like they're knitting. So that's even thinking about or looking at images of people knitting. What does that look like? What does a scarf folded up look like? What do leaves look like when they're, you know, fallen and you're sitting amongst them? What's a common pose that a kid would take on if they were sitting with their back against a tree and knitting and looking at their work? You know, all of those sorts of things, expressions and movement and all of this, these are all things that you need to, you know, if not be an expert at, certainly practice a lot of. And then in terms of, so I guess that's the qualities and skills that are essential to the role is having a lot of those sorts of things. And yeah, and then I also think you should be aware of some of the specific terminology of your industry as well. So before I started doing picture book illustration, I actually did a course that was through the Writers Centre, I think it is, Writers Centre, which is in somewhere closer to the city. Trying to think where it is now. I want to say Homebush, but that's not right. Anyway, and even though that was specific to writing children's books, it did have a lot of information about illustration as well. And I went in there wanting to be an illustrator, not wanting to be a writer, but I got a lot of information out of it. Including things like what is the most common format for a picture book, and, you know, as in how many pages, and what is some of the terminology like gutters, what does DPI mean, what's the difference between RGB and CMYK, all of that sort of stuff were things that I got from doing short courses and doing research and, you know, eventually working with publishers. Being able to read a contract, understand a contract, that's a good skill to have as well. So yeah, so that's sort of roughly quick version answers to those questions. Aoife also asked about being an arts teacher. So do you want to give me specific questions on that, or is it just sort of the generally where to start?
Well, apart from actually getting the like qualifications of, you know, like teaching and stuff, where would you start in being like, where would you recommend for doing art specific stuff? Because I'm aiming, hopefully, my two goals are either being a tattoo artist or a high school art teacher. Like, would you recommend like what specifically to focus on in study for, like, with the perspective of eventually teaching this, or where to like tutor or something to do to enhance skills for that kind of thing, I guess?
Yeah, look, I'd say I think there's two different aspects to that. So if you're looking to be kind of like a freelance art teacher, art tutor, which would be more what Sydney Art School kind of tutors are akin to, then that doesn't require a specific teaching qualification. Whereas if you're wanting to be a high school art teacher, then yes, you need to have the education, you know, like a diploma, not diploma, sorry, a bachelor's in education. And what's interesting about that, I think, is that I know a few art teachers in both in primary school and in high school who have gone more of the education route. And in terms of their actual kind of knowledge or skill set relating to art, often it's not that specific.
Yeah.
Like a lot of them have sort of just, in terms of their own specific kind of skill set, and this is not me trying to be derogatory at all, but a lot of them don't actually have really strong foundations in practical art. They might have, some educational or theoretical strong grounding, and they might have one particular art type that they are specifically good at. But my understanding is that you don't need to necessarily have those technical skills to be able to teach at a primary school or high school level.
Yeah.
Should you? Probably, but do you
Typically
need to?
fall into that.
Yeah. So, but in terms of tutoring more at like a private art school or kind of the TAFE, so the RTO kind of system, that does rely more on practical skill sets. And I think one way to kind of get yourself started is to work for a school like Sydney Art School. And again, with that kind of thing, it's about talking to whoever owns the school or the company or whatever it is, letting them know that you have practical skills, and seeing if they sort of have any opportunities. So a good example for that is, and this does tie into how did I specifically start teaching for Sydney Art School. I, many years ago, when I was I was training my own art, one of my tutors recommended me to a lady who was running Hens Nights, doing life drawing for Hens Nights. And it was just like a weekend job. You'd have a bunch of hens would come in, you're having a party, you'd have a life model there, and you just teach them how to draw. It was a great, really fun job. Most of it, I'd say like 80% of it was just, making jokes, trying to stop the hens from groping the model too much. But there was drawing involved as well. So the woman who runs it, who I'm still very good friends with now, I don't do the job anymore, but I still, as I say, good friends with her. She would sort of just say you have to have a big personality and you've got to have some drawing skills. These days, there's heaps of, she was actually the first to do that, but now there's heaps of different ones that you could do as well, like paint and sip, or, any of that style. And I do think that there's something to be said for those jobs, because the requirements from you as an artist is not that high. You don't have to have a teaching qualification to do it, but it will give you some pretty quick hands-on experience to be like, okay, I've got to sit in a room with a group of strangers and I've got to teach them how to paint a specific picture, or I've got to teach them how to draw a nude person. And when I then, because I did that for several years, the school, Sydney Art School, was looking for a watercolor tutor, and one of my friends recommended me to Helen, saying that I'm a watercolor artist. And when I spoke to her, I brought it up. I said, well, I've been teaching this life drawing, which, maybe it's a little bit silly in terms of what the actual level of art coming out of it is, but it means that I've got a lot of experience talking to groups of people. I feel very comfortable demonstrating in front of a group of people. And, I can kind of control a room. I can work to a format and blah, blah, blah. And so that's how I started teaching at the school. So yeah, if I would look at those kind of organizations as probably one in your area, and, send them an email or have a look on their website. Are they looking for tutors? Often they are. Often the people who end up tutoring for them are students. It's often, just a weekend, like Friday, Saturday kind of job. They pay reasonably well, at least they did when I was doing it. And yeah, it'll get you started in terms of working with people, demonstrating, teaching. So yeah, I think that's definitely one to kind of look at to literally get you started. Other things that you can look at too.
Do you know if Sydney Art School is looking for any?
What was that? What was that?
Do you know if Sydney Art School is looking for any?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Absolutely. If it's something you're interested in, and this applies to pretty much anyone, talk to Helen. Because I mean, where most of the tutors start at Sydney Art School is teaching kids classes. So because like Garrett recently. Garrett was a student here up until quite recently. And he started, and same with Ren. They both were here as students, and then they both told Helen that they were interested in teaching classes. And I think initially she got them to just start doing like shadowing, you know, and kind of assisting one of the other tutors. And then now they're both doing their own kids' classes. So yeah, we're always looking for tutors, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll write that down.
You should write
Well,
that.
thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Any other questions relating to that, relating to anything else? I don't know what other industries I could talk to you about. Stained glass, I did do for many years as well. I could talk to you about stained glass. That is so niche though. If anyone was saying they wanted to get into stained glass right now, I'd say, well, good luck, because I don't know where the jobs are. I stopped, oh, no, I won't go into that story. I stopped doing stained glass because I ended up in my boss's garage essentially while he was having an extremely ugly and messy divorce with his wife. So I had to I had to leave because I couldn't put up with them arguing all the time. And that was one of the biggest stained glass companies in Sydney. So there is not a lot of work. It's very, very niche. But yeah, that's other work that I do know a little bit about. Yeah, any other questions? Any other thoughts, comments?
On Tuesday, we were hearing about having YouTube and TikTok and all that sort of thing. Do you sell much artwork through that?
Nah. Like, I know I should, but it's so much hard work. Like, if I'm just going to be brutally honest about it, it's so much work. It is. And so, I mean, I talked about this in one of the other assessment tutorials, gave an example of like social media stuff, and I've used my mum as an example. So my mum's a professional photographer, and she also owns a homeware store. Her homeware store and her professional photography Instagrams are both, you know, really very popular. She's got I think over 100,000 followers for both. And so yes, she sells through both of those. She sells quite a lot, especially prints of her photography. But she's put in a lot of work to build up that following. And nowadays she has like at least one dedicated person who just deals with her social media. So that's a person who is putting up all of her posts, curating the posts, putting up reels, you know, answering people's inquiries, commenting, connecting, all of that sort of business. So it's a massive enterprise, honestly. And as much as I think it is really important, I haven't, aside from when I said, like, if I've put up a post saying, you know, I'm available for commission, I have had people DM me on that. But that's come from people that I sort of already know. Oh, and actually I have, for the last couple of years, I've also done like a small works sale towards the end of the year. And it'll be some of my watercolor demos, you know, because I just do so many of those. I've got stacks and stacks and stacks of watercolor demos that are all sort of roughly the same size, and they're all just random images. So often in sort of November, I'll put up a post saying all of these small works for sale. They're all pretty much the same kind of price, and it's quite cheap. And so I'll often sell, I don't know, between, you know, 10 to 12 of those. But aside from that, no. And that's, again, selling to people who pretty much already know me. I've never done anything that's gone viral and ended up, you know, getting me thousands of followers. So as much as I know it's important, it's also a full-time job. Okie dokie. Any other questions? We've gotten into the third slide of this presentation. I mean, I think we're getting some good, interesting information, but it's yeah, slow goings today. We might end up continuing this one next week. So let's have a look. Next slide. And this is just thinking about industry adjacent connections. So these are people who I would say are still involved with our industry, but also might be people who you don't necessarily immediately think of when you think about art, and you think about the world of art. So, but these are all people who are involved with, or, you know, you may need to have contact with for various purposes, for whatever reason. So there's a lot there. Framers and suppliers, art societies, gallery owners, writers, curators, collection managers, so on and so on. People advertising, marketing, social media, even tradies, you know, handymen or handy people, people with trucks, power tools, local business owners, caterers, musicians. These are all people who might be involved in some kind of context or some kind of way with anything that you're pursuing. Certainly, if we were to look at just an example of having an exhibition, pretty much all of those people in that list would be people that you would hope to have contact with, or, you know, potentially have at your exhibition, because they would be either helping you set it up or helping you make your opening night really exciting and good, or they might be providing further kind of industry contacts. I've really got to go to the toilet. I'm very sorry. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pop this on
You're
the
only
screen.
human,
I
Krista.
know. Normally I hold out, but I don't have a video to put on while I quickly go to the toilet just at the moment. So I'm just going to put this on the screen, how to stay up to date. Have a little read through that, and I'll be back in just a second. Oh, I'm back. Nearly fell over my chair, but I'm here and I didn't fall over my chair. Okay. So, staying up to date. And this is obviously about staying up to date in terms of also promoting your own availability, making those contacts and so on. Yeah, there's a lot here that I think is just sort of generally good advice, like the last one, mention everyone in your thank you speeches. But it's certainly, there's certainly a few ideas here that maybe you wouldn't have thought of. So worth kind of thinking about. And also thinking about networking, and I've mentioned this before, but thinking about networking not in a kind of, insidious way where it's American Psycho, business cards and people using each other, but just sort of understanding that networks form and can form quite organically, and they can just be about people wanting to help and uplift each other. So right now you do already have a network of people around you. So, think about that network. How can you help other people? And then, potentially they might help you in return. And obviously that's not the reason to help someone, but more just kind of understanding the ways that relationships can end up opening up opportunities for us. So into element 2 here, evaluate different business practices. Thinking about commission work, we sort of talked about this in terms of how to get commissions and what to do if and when you do get a commission. Eva just said, whenever I give my business card out, I always ask them to check out the subtle off-white coloring despite my card not being white at all. That's great. Does that land very often, or do people give you kind of side eye when you do that?
Sometimes they're confused, and sometimes they say, "Have a nitwit like you get that."
Excellent, that's fun. Okay, so thinking about commissions, as I said, start with family and friends, post the work online, and you can build things from there. It's a good way to start, is just by get someone that you already know to commission you to do something, and that can be, something that they pay you for, hopefully. Or, maybe it is something that you're doing as a gift for someone. And so maybe you're not going to charge money for it at this stage, but being able to sort of present a portfolio of work, of commissioned work, is a really good step to make sure that people start to view you as the sort of artist that they can approach and ask for commissions. Make sure that you do have a contract. And I would say this even for family, even for friends, think about contracts as a statement of expectations. Don't think of it in the context of, it's one person's trying to get something over the other. It's about making sure that everyone is really clear on what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. So I'm very, very pro contracts. You can find sample contracts online. So you don't have to come up with your own contract just straight off the bat. But you just want to make sure that it does cover those specific bases, at least to start with, is what's being asked, what are you being asked to do? When are you being asked to do it by? What is the compensation for what you're doing? Even if you were doing something as a gift, or, doing it more or less for free, if someone is commissioning you to do something, even just getting them to pay you for the materials, even if you're prepared to sort of put in your own time in terms of the labor, make sure that is in the contract. And then what happens? Contingency plans. What happens if it doesn't go according to plan? That's actually quite an important one, and one that certainly I have included in my illustration contracts. Usually with publishers, the contract that you get given is the contract that you're given, and especially when you're starting out, there's not much in the way of negotiating those contracts. You kind of either just accept it or you don't. But when it comes to a contract, if I'm writing a contract or, I'm doing a one-off project for someone, it's worth saying that if there are, I will accept 3 changes before I start charging a changing fee. And what I would mean by that is, like if I was doing, say, the example that I have here, this is a commissioned work that I was given quite a long time ago now, but it was the front of someone's childhood home. And she told me what the address was, and she asked me to go there and paint it, basically, because she wanted to have a picture of it. Lovely little commission. But this one wouldn't necessarily have it, but having in the contract saying, well, if the person wants changes, what is an acceptable kind of change? Like if they suddenly turn around and say, you know what, I don't want it as a picture of my house, I want a picture of a teddy bear that I had when I was a kid, that's quite a substantial change. So that sort of change I will put in a contract and say, well, now there's going to be an additional fee because you've substantially changed the requirements of the commission. If it was more along the lines of, oh, look, could you, add some flowers blooming on the archway instead of it just being the vine, that's a very small change. And so maybe I would say you can have 3 small changes before I start charging a change fee. But these are all things that you can put into the contract. And again, it's about making sure that things are clear and standardized. Everyone knows what's going to happen. Make sure that you have personal and professional boundaries. Be clear about what those boundaries are. Meaning, if you're not prepared to take calls at 2 a.m., then make sure that people understand what are your, sort of business hours, as it were. When are you available to have a discussion? Try not to have strangers come to your place of residence to collect work if possible for privacy. So sometimes you'll be shipped, your work you'll need to ship it, or you might need to deliver it. That's fine. But yeah, obviously it's just a general safety principle. Don't let strangers into your house. And be clear what you need from someone. So for example, you need a clear photo or a clear deadline, an accurate understanding of their budget, or a clear description of what they would like, etc. So one of the first questions I ask people if people want to commission me is, well, what is it? So is it a portrait? Is it a group of people? Is it an oil painting? Is it watercolor painting? What size are you looking for? Ask all these questions before I give a price, because all of those will affect my price. 3 people in a portrait is much harder to do than 1 person in isolation. And so I might not charge triple the price for 3 people, but I would certainly change the price if it was 3 people versus 1 person.
Krista, do you sort of estimate your price based on hours that you put into it? So sort of like your time is worth, say, $150 an hour or something, or that way?
That kind of goes to a broader question of pricing generally. And I would say that it can be quite personal. So if you are fast, like if you are quite a quick artist, then I wouldn't be charging by the hour necessarily. Some ways, different kind of common ways that people price things is one way that people might price things is based sort of an hourly rate. You want to be good at estimating how long it's going to take you as well, though. Like if you're pretty confident that you know how long it's going to take, then you might feel comfortable saying an hourly rate. But if you're not sure, that can be a pretty tough one to start with, because you might find that you end up spending a lot longer on it than you thought. But another way that people will give a price might be based on size, the physical size of it. They might have more of a flat rate for a physical size, or they might have sort of a flat rate based on physical size and subject matter. So it depends. It depends on, what your kind of pace is, and also kind of how much I think you feel and the person who's commissioning you feels is reasonable. So I don't think that there's a quick answer to that, unfortunately. certainly I would say if you are a quick artist, like if you are quite fast, then basing it on the time, yeah, it's like I would be more likely to base it on the size than the time. Whereas if you're a slower artist, then you might base it more on the time than the size. Because you might feel like, well, if I do a smaller picture, it's going to take me almost as long as doing a massive picture because I'm such a stickler for details. Then you might sort of go, well, yeah, I'll give myself an hourly rate.
I guess you have to throw into the equation what you think people are prepared to pay.
Yep, that's also a portion of it. What are people prepared to pay? And also, what's the cost of materials? That's important. You know, some materials are cheaper than others, so it's important to have that. And if you're getting something that is non-standard sizing, like particularly large, so if a watercolor was, someone wanted to commission a watercolor that was above a standard piece of watercolor paper size, then the cost of the piece of paper, you know, might double immediately. So you've certainly got to take that into account as well. Yeah, it's a tricky question. There's no quick answer to it, unfortunately, because like I said, you know, someone can gaffer tape a banana to a wall, and apparently that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. All right. If we're thinking about working collaboratively, collaboration is something that's going to often happen whether or not you're working as an individual artist, whether you're working for commission, whether you're working on something like picture books, you know, whatever sector of the fine art industry that you're working in, there's a very solid chance that you're going to end up needing to collaborate with other people. And so from that perspective, it's important that you can. It's important that you can play well with others. That includes other artists, that includes gallery curators, staff, that includes in the case of the picture there, and that includes publishers and authors. So being able to work collaboratives is a really big part of being an artist. And as I mentioned, I think there is something that you know really needs to be emphasized, which is how much you need to be able to deal with criticism, and deal with, you know, people asking you to change things or adjust things. It's very I think it's very difficult to be very successful within our industry and also be extremely precious, you know, about your work or about dealing with other people. So, you know, you can start off opportunities. Collaborating with people might include volunteering or sharing costs with other collaborators. And so while that might be beneficial to the career, there's also obviously drawbacks to being an unpaid volunteer. So if we think about it in that context, what are some benefits? What are some drawbacks of you know, volunteering to collaborate with other people?
The other person might be hard to get along with.
That is a potential drawback. The other person might be difficult to get along with. Absolutely. You could not just not make any money, you could lose money, especially if we're talking about something like a group show, and you're investing your own money into that group show. If you don't make any sales or you don't get any substantial financial sort of benefit from it, you could potentially lose money. Well, what are some positives? What are some benefits of working with other people?
you sort of broaden your connections and you get ideas from the other person, meet other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Broaden your connections, get ideas from working with other people. It gives you the opportunity to do things that maybe you never even considered doing before. That's a big benefit. I mean, going back to what I mentioned before, even though it sort of ended fairly disastrously, working in stained glass came from working with another artist, and then he was working in stained glass and he recommended me to start working at a studio. And so that was certainly something I'd never thought about doing. But as soon as he said, would you be interested in doing stained glass? I thought, actually, yes, I would. Sounds amazing. So if he said the workload might be easier to handle when working with another person. Yeah, very true. It's sharing the load. Collaborating with other people does allow you to, share the load and spread, give different jobs or different kind of aspects of the work to different people. And I guess tying into that too, it means you can kind of work to people's strengths. You might have a particular strength in one area and someone else might have a strength in a different area, and the two of you working together means that you can kind of cover more bases, which is also, very good positive.
Also, I have a point to add. When it's a collaboration in exhibitions or as well as in work, the ground rules must be very clear. The share of, the understanding of who is doing what, and certain things need not be told, but it is well understood. Because some of the times when you're collaborating with someone new, you assume that this is going to get done, and it usually doesn't. Because it was not spoken, it will not be clear. So it's good if both of them sit, collaborate, have that. Have a discussion, have those points in place before directly getting into the work. That kind of meeting is quite important when we are doing a collaboration, to understand each other, so that we know what, even before to know what their strengths, how much will they be involved, and how much and in what areas will each other be involved. And if something is promised from each other, again, it goes to work ethics, and they have to stick to what is being told. And also some take full ownership of the work in certain areas, and while some just have a check. So in place of ownership, you have to trust whoever it is, and don't try to these are quite important things in collaboration, either in work or as well as in exhibitions.
Oh, excellent points, definitely. Very good. Let's have a look. Next slide here. So making a business plan. I've talked a lot about sort of different opportunities and a little bit about, starting to work in specific kinds of fields. So in terms of, for yourself, making your own kind of business plan, this doesn't necessarily have to be rigid. It doesn't have to be, a hard definition and the only thing that you're going to do, or the only thing you're going to try and do. But sometimes it is worth writing things down, making lists, making a bit of a plan, and thinking about these sort of questions. So what is your personal strategy? What are your goals? What are you aiming to do? And then what can you do today? What's a first step that you can take right now that will start you on that plan? What can you do in the long term? So what are your sort of long-term goals, or what are the points along the process that are going to be your markers for the next step or a level of success? And then what are your safety nets? Do you have any safety nets? What are you going to do if it takes longer than you were expecting, or if it's more difficult than you were expecting? How are you going to breach you know, any sort of financial or even emotional or artistic gaps. So these are all pretty important questions, and they are also very personal questions as well. It's important to, you know, recognize and remember that plans will change. Your situation can change. Your wants and needs as an artist can change. The opportunities can change. So even if you start having a bit of a strategy now and a plan now, you might find that 5 years down the track, 10 years down the track, your strategies or your goals have changed. So it's okay to keep adjusting things. But that first kind of step of actually sitting down, writing down some ideas, writing down some thoughts about what it is that you want to do, and then how you're going to do that, and starting with what's one, you know, one step that I can take today, and then what's something that I can think about or work on long term. That's a really good way to kind of get yourself going, because it can feel certainly very overwhelming when we first want to start becoming more professional and more businesslike with what we're doing. So you don't have to do it all straight away. You don't have to have all of the plans, all of the practical stuff in place immediately. We can work towards things over periods of time. But having a little bit of a sense of where you are going or where you want to go, I think is really valuable and really important. So no matter where you are in terms of your sort of stage of development, these are things to think about and things to kind of work on at any stage. So we're up to element 3, address financial aspects of creative practice. The first thing for this section that we're going to talk about is pricing. And this is a conversation that I have had with a lot of students over the years. And I know that it's something that we're often thinking about. And it's very, I think, very difficult to work out what should be your pricing, how to price for yourself. Fundamentally, there is no one correct answer. There's quite a few variables that will go into pricing. And when we're talking pricing, it's not just about pricing fine art. So we might be talking about pricing your fine art. But obviously during the tutorial last week, we mentioned a few other kinds of industry jobs that you might have. And for those jobs, pricing would be different. So pricing, for example, for illustration jobs, which I talked about quite a bit last week, pricing for illustration jobs can be pretty variable. Sometimes in the past, I have given a quote that's a price per illustration. I've also given quotes that are just flat rates for the whole book. I've given quotes that are or I've been given contracts, rather, I should say, where it is the what's the word I'm looking for? Advance. It's the advance on royalties. So there is quite a lot of variables, and it does depend on what we're talking about. So what sort of, you know, service are we providing, or is it a specific artwork that we're trying to price? If we look at, I think one thing that comes up quite a lot is pricing specifically an artwork that you have produced. Even with that, there can be a number of factors involved, but that's certainly one that is in a lot of people's minds. So there's some of these sort of guides here in terms of the step 1 through 6. These are different ways that you can look at it, and things for you to think about. At the end of the day, it's going to be very personal. And there's a couple of things that I will mention later on that I would say need to be your baseline. But here is sort of some suggestions. So let's say you've produced an artwork and now you're trying to work out what price you should put on the artwork. So the number one thing you can do, first thing you can do, is look at what other comparable artworks are being priced at. So industry research and comparison. Now there's a few different ways that you can do that as well. So some of that might be looking at artists who are producing a somewhat similar kind of work to you. How much are they pricing their work for? And where you might find that information would be on their website, or if they're selling through a gallery, the gallery website will often have their prices, or they might be selling things on, you know, sort of online sales places like Blue Thumb, and that will also list their prices. If you are comparing your paintings to someone else's paintings, you do want to kind of keep in mind things like the size. So you might look at a picture and think, oh yeah, that's quite similar to my picture, and they're charging, say, $1,200 for it. But then you realize, if you actually look at the size, that their picture is maybe 1 meter by 2 meters, whereas your picture is 50 centimeters by 90 centimeters. And therefore, pricing it at the same, making that sort of comparison, is not really a direct comparison. So that's the first thing that you can do, is research other artists who are doing somewhat similar work to you, of a similar size, and who have a similar kind of level of experience and exposure. Then the second part, you can set yourself an hourly rate. I think we sort of touched on this one last week when I was talking to Jane about an hourly rate. And I said that it's fair enough to kind of give yourself an hourly rate, but if you are particularly slow, and there's nothing wrong with taking your time and being slow, if you're particularly slow, then you might feel demoralized if you set yourself an hourly rate that is too low. Or you might find that setting yourself an hourly rate, that's like a reasonable hourly rate, you end up kind of pricing yourself out of the market. So if you say, okay, well, I want to charge $20 an hour, which for any other kind of job, that's a fairly low kind of entry level wage. If you say, I'm going to charge $20 per hour, and then I do a painting that takes me 100 hours, suddenly that painting is $2,000. And if you are a slow painter, if it's going to take you 100 hours to do even quite a small painting, $2,000 might be too much. So, and the reverse is true as well. I'm quite a fast painter. So when people ask me how long have I spent on a particular painting, sometimes I'm hesitant. I'm not hesitant to talk to students about it, but I'm hesitant to talk to buyers about it, because I can paint a picture quite fast. And I don't think it's fair for me to actually say how many hours it's taken if people are then going to sort of do the math and go, oh, wow, you know, technically I've charged $100 an hour to produce that work. What the hourly rate doesn't take into account in that sort of situation is how much experience I have, and the fact that I have developed a skill set that allows me to work faster. And I've done that quite deliberately. So, and this is there's a sort of a famous anecdote about Picasso. Picasso going into a restaurant and sketching the waitress on like a napkin or something, a piece of paper or whatever. And when he'd done the sketch, the waitress came over and asked if she could have it. And he said it was some fairly large sum of money if she wanted to buy it, you know, the equivalent of, say, $50,000. And she said, well, it only took you a couple of minutes. And his reply was, well, no, actually, it took me 25 years. The point of that anecdote is essentially to say that all of your experience, all of your development, all of the skill, the many, many hours that you have put into developing your abilities means that even if you can knock out a picture in a very fast period of time, that's it didn't take you just that period of time. All of the effort and energy that you put into developing that skill set should also be taken into consideration. So as much as I sort of don't mind the hourly rates as an idea, I think you should also consider, am I particularly a particularly fast painter, or am I a particularly slow painter or artist, whatever it might be. So the hourly rate, I'm not 100% sure of, but if you find yourself somewhere in the middle, like if you calculate that, yes, maybe it takes me 30 hours to do a painting, and I want to charge more, pay myself $30 an hour, then that's going to be $900 for that painting. You might kind of look at that and go, oh yeah, that makes sense, and people are prepared to pay that. So that's how I'll set myself up. Something else that you absolutely must take into consideration is material and framing costs, especially if you are going to sell the work framed. And this sort of brings us to another point in terms of materials. And this is something I've mentioned a few times in assessments. When I'm marking assessments, we will often ask you for a budget. And we'll say, calculate your budget, and we'll say all of the things that are involved. So if in the assessment you are to produce a painting, we'll say calculate your budget. What you should be calculating is everything involved in producing that painting, regardless of whether or not you already have those materials. So often I see people writing in their budget saying, oh, I've already bought a canvas, I've already bought the paint, so they don't cost me anything. Well, that's not true. They did cost you something. Even if they cost you something in the past, they still cost you money. And more importantly, when you use them up, which you will in producing a picture, you're going to have to replace them. So it's going to cost you money in the future. So whenever you're thinking about a budget, you have to take that into consideration. Don't just think, oh, well, I already have the paints, I already have the canvas, I already have the solvent, I already have, all of those bits and pieces. You should include those. Think about what you are going to use up in producing the picture. So you're definitely going to use up the canvas, which means it will need to be replaced. That's going to cost money. How much money will it cost to replace it in the future? You're going to use up some paint. You might not be able to estimate very well until you have a bit of experience how much paint you're going to use, but you could easily assume that you're going to use maybe 2 or 3 full tubes of paint to produce, a painting that is maybe 1 meter by 1.5 meters, if it's roughly that big. So you should calculate the cost of the canvas, the cost of 3 tubes of paint. You might also add half a container of solvent, because you'll probably end up using that. Are you going to varnish it? If you're going to varnish it, then maybe half a container of varnish. All of this will add up pretty quickly. And you'll find that without even putting a paintbrush to your canvas, your budget is already at $250. So if you calculate your materials, and including all of your canvas, paints, etc., plus an hourly rate, then maybe that previous example that I gave where we're saying $30 an hour, I'm going to put in 30 hours, $900 plus $250 for materials. Then now that's gone from a $900 painting to $1,150. So otherwise, that money is coming out of your pocket. That $250 is coming out of your pocket, and you're not getting $900 for your picture. You're getting $650. That's a lot of maths. I'm very bad at maths. Please don't quote any of those numbers that I just gave you. They're just examples. The next thing that you need to think about and consider is your experience. So that includes any awards you might have won, any competitions you might have entered and been a finalist in, any, your sort of reputation. So all of those things should also be included in your price, in your pricing. In part of that too is making sure that you're not going backwards. So making sure that your prices are either remaining steady or gradually increasing. as soon as you start to allow your prices to drop, that's a very slippery slope. And it also means that from the perspective of people buying your work as an investment, you're essentially you're devaluing the work that you've already produced. So if you've sold, say, 3 paintings quite recently that were 1 meter by 1.5 meters, and you sold them for $2,000 each, if the next month you produce a painting of the same size and suddenly you sell it for $1,500, then from a kind of an art market perspective, from an investor perspective, you've just now essentially made everyone who bought the picture for $2,000, you've devalued all of their paintings by $500. All of those paintings are now essentially worth $1,500 instead of $2,000. So it's important that you either maintain your prices or you gradually increase your prices. You certainly don't want to be going in the opposite direction and losing money on your pictures and therefore devaluing the paintings that you've already produced. It's also a good thing to think about making a variety of works at a variety of price points. That can also include things like prints. It can include smaller works. It can include works that maybe don't fit into a body of work or a major sort of body of work that you're producing. An example of this, and this is fairly specific to me, but pretty much every year for like the last 3 years, towards the end of the year in about November, so actually coming up pretty soon, I should get myself organized, I will do like a batch sale of my demonstration works. And I sell these pictures off cheaper than I would sell any of my my more sort of original works that are a part of a bigger, my creative body of works. Because these demonstration works are usually watercolors. They're usually from my watercolor classes. They're kind of just random images that we've done over the course of the year. And often I have multiples of the same image because I've done the same demonstration more than once. So I'll often sell those off relatively cheap. I won't sell them framed. I'll just sell individual works. They're often quite small. And it just means that it's an opportunity for, if people are, wanting to have one of my works, but they don't want to buy a larger work, or, they feel like the larger works are too expensive. It does sort of open me up to being able to just make a few smaller sales. So that's an example of having sort of different price points that I would otherwise not sell works of that size for as little as I do. And then another thing that you can do as well is ask someone else in the industry for a second opinion. So we do often underprice ourselves when we're just starting out. So having a chat to one of your tutors or someone else within the industry and asking them, what do they think if you're thinking about putting a price on something? Do they think it's a good price? Do they think you're overestimating or underestimating? I think fundamentally, when it comes to pricing, your works, they're kind of worth as much as what someone will pay. That's kind of a hard truth, unfortunately. It's not very nice to hear, because if you're not selling works, it might make you feel like your works aren't worth very much. But certainly you will gradually over time find the right kind of balance between what you feel is a good or a decent price for your work, and what you feel is not enough. Something I will say too, and this is probably one that you might have heard from some of the other tutors, there's what I would call the gut check price. And I do give this advice to a lot of beginner students, like people who are just sort of starting out and still, even with all of these other examples, they're still struggling to sort of find that right amount. the gut check price is whatever, and this is going to be appropriate to the exhibition coming up if you are thinking of selling your work at the exhibition. The gut check price is the minimum price that you will feel, if not super happy, at least comfortable selling your work. And so to figure out what that price is, what I would suggest you do is think about a specific work that you want to sell and then start ludicrously low. So imagine someone has offered you $20 for it. No one should be selling their work for $20. No one. So if someone offered you $20 for, let's say you've got a particular painting in your mind that you're thinking about selling, if someone offered you $20, you'd say no. You'd say no straight away, I hope. And if you wouldn't, you should. Then slowly increase the amount in your mind. What if someone offered you $50? What if someone offered you 80? What if someone offered you 120? What if someone offered you 140? What if someone offered you 200? Keep kind of increasing the price until you have the moment where you go, oh yeah, actually I would be comfortable with that if someone offered me that amount of money. I think you can then increase it a little bit more. You can go, if let's say your gut check price, you've got particular drawing that you're very proud of, you really like it, you get to doing that sort of exercise, you get to $150 and you think, oh yeah, if someone offered me $150, I'd be all right with letting it go. If you go a little bit higher, $200, oh yeah, I'd be quite happy with $200. $200, I'd be pretty happy if someone paid that. Then that's a good price. That's maybe the right price for you. I think still, check in with a tutor or someone else as well, but that's the way to give yourself a gut check price. Still include materials in that. So still think about, am I covering the cost of my materials and a little bit more? But certainly when I was starting out, that's the method that I used the most. And it worked fairly well, I would find, because fundamentally what that kind of approach does is it means that if the work does sell, you're not unhappy. You go, oh yeah, good. Yeah. You might not be jumping over the moon about it, but you don't feel bad. You don't feel regretful. Someone doesn't give you the price that you asked, and then you think, oh God, I shouldn't have done that. I should have asked for more. That's the worst situation that you can be in. And I have been in that situation before. I've done a painting I was very proud of. I put a price on it that was too low. Someone bought it at that price and I thought, oh God, I wish I'd never set that price. So from that point onwards, I'd sort of give myself that gut check price, put the price on it that I felt like, yep, if someone gave me this, I would not be upset. In fact, I'd be quite happy. And then when the work sells, that's the feeling I have is, yeah, okay, good. I'm quite happy that someone's bought it for that amount. So that's some thoughts, some ideas on how to price your work. That's, as I say, mostly about fine art. When we're talking about other industries, so last week we talked a little bit about like tattooing, we talked a little bit about teaching, we talked quite a bit about illustration. Each of those industries will have their own kind of benchmarks and their own sort of prices. And certainly I would say the research, being able to research those is a little bit easier. When it comes to things like tattoos or it comes to teaching, you can sort of look around for jobs. It'll almost always be an hourly rate, or it might be for tattoo art, might be based on commission. It might be based on commission based on size. When it comes to illustration, often there will just be a contract with a fixed price, although some of the publishers that I've worked with, like Little Steps, they allow you to quote. So they'll contact me and say, we've got someone interested in using you as an illustrator. They'll give you a brief kind of synopsis, like an overview of what the book is about. And then they'll say, can you give us a quote? And for that, I will quote based on sort of, I know what my experience is, I know what my level is at, I know how long things are going to take me, and they'll either say yes or no. When it comes to more traditional publishers, Little Steps is a hybrid publisher. So when it comes to more traditional publishers, they will often just offer you a contract with a particular set rate, and the rate will be advance on royalties. So the advance on royalties means that like a standard picture book, royalties on a standard picture book works out to often be about $2 per book. And then that gets split between the author and the illustrator if they are two separate people. If they're the same person, then you will get all of the royalties on that. It's about 10%. Somewhere between 7 to 10% is how much royalties you get on the book, and that's on the recommended retail price. So roughly $1 per book. Usually the first print run of a picture book is 5,000 copies. So the advance on the royalties of that will be somewhere in the vicinity of $2,000 to $3,000, maybe. So it's not very much. If the book sells out, then you will get up to $5,000 on that first print run, if it's a highly successful book. So, you know, there's lots of books that sell millions of copies, then you will get millions of dollars in royalties. Hurrah! But for a lot of us, sort of smaller illustrators who haven't had those massive sellout books, the royalties are up to about $5,000 per book, which, as I say, not that much. One thing that you do get as an illustrator, though, which is a new, like a scheme, it's not brand new, but it's within the last few years it's come out, which is electronic lending rights and public lending rights. And that's a royalty scheme that the government provides royalties to illustrators based on your books being lent out at libraries, or digital copies, which is the electronic lending rights. So books being lent out electronically from libraries. And so every year, so this is probably where I've made the most money from being an illustrator. And again, not much money in it. Is every year I get around about $2,500 from that. And that's just from the government acknowledging that people are borrowing my books. And so you register every title that you've produced that you are owed royalties on, and you'll get money based on each of those. So yeah, so fundamentally other industries will probably have more of a clearer price point. When it comes to fine art, it is much more personal, and as I say, can be a bit trickier, a bit harder to sort of work out. All right, so that's a lot to do with pricing. Something that I do want to mention, though, and this is very important, when you're starting out, people will want to pay you in exposure. It's almost never worth it. Every time, like any time I've been offered a job and the remuneration of it is exposure, it's always been by people who are not professional enough to understand that artists should be paid for their work. And consequently, the exposure that they are offering is meaningless because they're not big enough, they don't understand the industry well enough to actually understand how to give you good exposure anyway. So I had a friend who was a photographer, and what she would always say is either do it for free because you believe in it or get paid what it's worth. And that's it. Those are the two options. So when she would say do it for free because you believe in it, that might be, you know, if you're doing it as a charity work, you might be, you know, creating an image which is then going to be auctioned off and the proceeds are going to go to charity, something like that. That is absolutely a fair fair thing to do, a good use of your time. If you believe in that charity, you believe in that work, and it's going to be beneficial to them, by all means, go ahead and do that. But in every other case, get paid what it's worth. Don't do it for exposure. Exposure is meaningless, and you will never get beneficial exposure. When I think about the paid jobs that I've had, if there has been any component of me getting a job because of exposure, the exposure has come from another paid job. So what I mean by that is I've been offered a job, I've been paid for that job, and then someone has seen that work and then has offered me payment for a new job. That's the only exposure. That's the only time that I benefited from exposure, is when I got paid to do the work. I did a few things when I was starting out for just exposure. Nothing came of it. The exposure was absolutely meaningless. There were no further jobs. There was nothing else that came from it. So get paid what it's worth, or do it because you believe in it, but don't do it for the exposure. It will never be worth it. So let's have a little discussion about finances. Thinking about ways that you might be able to save money in your artistic practice. Now, also, before we go into this discussion as well, if you have any questions about everything that we've just been talking about, in terms of pricing your work or exposure or anything else, please do let me know, ask those questions. Otherwise, I'd love to hear some thoughts about how you think or how you do save money in your own artistic practice. Hit me with some ideas. You can put them in the group chat, or you can just unmute yourself and say them out loud. Is there anything you're currently doing? Is there anything that any strategies that you are aware of that other people do?
One thing I learned in my during my period in learning arts is knowing color theory well will save money for your paints. So that's very important because you always have to know the alternative way of getting what you want, because some of the tubes are really expensive. So I then understood it's not only for your artwork, it's also for your finances. Color theory plays a very, very important role because you really need to know the alternatives. And I also can say, can I manage with these paint tubes that I have? And yeah, and the other thing is maintaining your materials so that there is a longevity of the materials, like your paint brushes, or they look like we don't have to put so much of time, but actually it really helps to save a lot of money from your pocket.
Yeah, that's such great advice. Absolutely. And both of those are such two very good things. I hadn't heard anyone say that in exactly that way, that color theory will help you save money, but you're right. You're 100% right. If you can limit your color choices so that you're not buying multiple tubes of more or less the same color, and as you say too, thinking about the series numbers or finding alternatives to expensive pigments, that's such a great way to save money. Absolutely. And then the second point you made is also such a great piece of advice on saving money, is the more you maintain your materials, the more careful you are with them, the longer they will last. And so I've got some paintbrushes that I've had for like 15 years at this point, actually possibly even longer, 16 or 17 years, which are my oil painting brushes. and because I'm very careful with them. I wash them. I'm very, like, I made sure that when I bought them in the first place, I bought really good quality paintbrushes, and then I have maintained them extremely carefully for all of these years. And so I haven't had to throw out many paintbrushes over the last 15 years, which has saved me a lot of money in the long run. Absolutely. Sophie said, I do freelance work on VGen, and I've learnt that using PayPal for processing payments isn't worth the fees they give you. Great. Yes. Also, really good tip is thinking about how you are getting money, and looking at the terms and conditions of different kind of payment platforms. So saying PayPal, their processing fees takes off too much of the cut. And so it isn't worth using them to process your fees. Great piece of advice. Yeah, absolutely. And that's all three of those that we've mentioned so far, I think, are so, like, really thoughtful and really good examples of ways that we can save money in our artistic practice. So very nice. Something that I'll mention, because and I'm putting this one out there because it's not exactly saving money per se, but keeping your receipts and then checking during tax time, making sure that you are claiming as much as possible. So if you have an ABN, which I would highly recommend all of you do, if you want to start selling your work, and this includes any kind of business practice, you should definitely have an ABN, Australian business number, and you should be setting up that ABN as a sole trader, because that's what you will be. As an artist, you'll be a sole trader. And what you can then do when you're saving all of your receipts is if you sell a painting for $3,000 and over the course of the year you spent, at least $3,000 on materials, even if those materials aren't related to the painting that you saved, you now don't need to pay any tax on that painting that you sold, because you can claim all of your tax back, $3,000 worth of your tax back on the materials that you spent. So it's saving money in terms of saving money on taxes that you might have to pay on any sales that you've made. And obviously, as your career kind of progresses, that will build up, hopefully, that will build up to the point that might end up being several $1,000s that you're saving at the end of the year. Excellent, good. Another little question here is, how might you keep track of your finances and spending as an artist? So that sort of leads us into that quite nicely. Again, thinking about your artistic practice, thinking about you as a sole trader with an ABN, what steps can you take or should you be taking to track your finances in terms of incoming money and outgoing money? I can tell you what I do, but I'd love to hear what other people think first.
Um, I'm just starting off, so I really have I just figured out something that works for me recently. So I divide my budget as per investment and the practice. So these are very two different, and my materials also very different. So how much I'm going to invest in something so that this will become my identity or my branding, or this work is going to be my future selling. Because so for that I give a good leverage for my practice, like for my college, and I try to reuse my materials, and also try to find more cheaper materials. Uh, uh, Try to find more cheaper materials, because initially I used to not have any segregation with these two, and I used to buy expensive material even for practice, and then I realized it's not sustainable in a long term. in a long term. So I started dividing my budget into investment, and investment will be my exhibition works and the works that I will be entering into the competitions, or any works that I want to showcase as a part of my portfolio. And so I started dividing like that, but I don't know how successful I will be in future because I yet not sold any paintings. But I keep a track of how much I'm spending on each painting, like how much is the canvas cost, and I track when I purchase, because I try to look when there is an offer.
Yeah.
So like in June, July, there's an offer with some of the art stores, and so every quarterly or seasonal sales. So I
Yeah.
buy them. I keep their original price, and then 1 year later, what is the price if there is any shift? And I try to keep upgrading my price based on the art materials, how they are increasing also. So, and also how my skill is developing, and the branding I'm going to build around. So like that, I have to have divided my, but I'm not sure how successful it is because I just, yeah. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just doing it for, it's sustainable for me at this point.
That's good. That's good. How are you recording it though?
I keep a track in my notebook of like I have a notebook only exclusive for all my painting, how much will it cost and all. I just keep a track of it as of now, but I'm planning to keep a spreadsheet because I'm more a spreadsheet person. So I won't have to just do it. I'm just lazy to, yeah, but I have to put it on the spreadsheet. I think that
Yeah.
will be easy for me in the future to calculate and see the shift in the pricing. And if I have to do a business data analytics on it and see how it's progressing and what's working and not working, I think spreadsheets are a good source.
Yes. Well, definitely and so this is what I wanted to sort of mention. There are programs that you can get, even free programs that will allow you to record things. Receipts are quite important as well. It is important that you have a record of your receipts, and you can get some programs that will allow you to immediately just scan your receipts. So you can just use your phone to essentially scan your receipt, and then it will keep it for you. But I also do use spreadsheets. And at the end of the year, especially, I'll go through all of my bank statements and credit card statements, and I'll just go through each of those. I'll know that, if I went to art scene and spent money, then that's definitely art materials. Quite often, if I've gone to office works, so I'll kind of look for individual sales that or individual purchases that I've made. They all go into my expenditures column, and then I'll keep a record of all my sales. I have an invoice template because I do a variety of work, and I'll make sure that I'm keeping a record of sales and my teaching and my services that I'm doing as well. So definitely worth investigating whatever stage you're at, but certainly you need to have electronic copies. You need to keep your receipts for a minimum of 5 years, and you need to have electronic copies of things as well. Like in terms of, when it comes to tax time, you need to be able to give all that information to the tax office. I do think it's worth talking to an accountant, but if you are talking to an accountant, like a tax professional accountant, make sure that you are talking to someone who understands how taxation works for artists, specifically visual artists, because we do have certain what's what I'm looking for, not exceptions, but certain there are certain tax things that apply specifically to visual artists that don't apply to other people. And so it's worth, if you are going to talk to a tax agent, it's worth talking to someone who understands that, because they will be able to help you understand what you can claim or what you can't claim in terms of your in terms of the tax back on your purchases and expenditures. But also there is there's a taxation again, can't think of the word, but it's specifically to visual artists. You can average your tax over the previous 5 years. So I've talked about this once before, and I'm not a tax professional, so I'm not telling you this as a fact. Like I said, you can't quote me on it specifically, but it's something that you can investigate for yourself. Where it's come from is that the government does understand that often visual artists, especially who are exhibiting, will work towards an exhibition. And then when they have that exhibition, they will end up having a large sum of money just come in that particular year. So let's say it's 2025 now. I have an exhibition. I've been working on that exhibition for the last 3 years. I've been accumulating works, been creating works. So in the last 3 years, I haven't made much money. I haven't had that many sales. Let's say, for example, over the last 3 years, I've had $10,000 in sales maximum for 3 years. Then in 2025, I have huge, amazing exhibition, sell out the entire show. Let's shoot for the moon. So I sell out the entire show. It does exceptionally well. And I suddenly make $100,000 that year. What the tax department allows us to do as visual artists, because I would go from a tax threshold, a tax bracket that is much lower for the last 3 previous years. I would have been in the lowest tax bracket. Suddenly, 2025, my tax bracket, I would suddenly jump up several tax brackets and I would lose a lot of money. So what the tax department allows us to do is average that $100,000 off over the previous 5 years. So instead of having that lump sum in 2025, what it allows us to do is say, instead, we can average that $100,000 plus whatever we made in the previous years out across the 5 years. So in the example that I gave, it would mean that over let's say over the last 5 years, I had $10,000 per year for 4 years and then $100,000 in 2025. Instead of suddenly paying tax on $100,000, I'd be dividing $140,000 by 5. And so I would be paying an average of tax on $28,000 per year. And so that's a significant shift in terms of, if you think about the tax brackets, you go from being less than $30,000 to over $100,000. So if you are talking to a tax agent who does not know this and doesn't understand this, then you might get taxed at that higher percentage. So it's definitely worth speaking to a tax agent who does get it, who does understand. And there are free tax services as well. Like, you can actually call and talk to the tax department. You can talk to someone there. They want to help you. They want to help you understand what your obligations are and so on. So don't be afraid to call them and talk to them about it. And they'll be able to give you better advice than me. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because I want you to understand that there are considerations, is the word I was looking for. There are specific considerations to visual artists. So make sure that you investigate those, you understand those, because that is an important thing for us to know, so that we're always going to potentially struggle a little bit. It might help us to struggle a little bit less. All right. I'm just going to have to, very sorry to do this again to everyone. I'm going to have to quickly go to the toilet. So I will come back in a couple of minutes. We will talk about, we might talk about this, we'll talk about copyright and IP in a second. I'll come back and I'll cross over, because I don't have slides for this. I'll cross over to the actual unit of competency, because there'll be some questions in there that we can have a look at. But I will be back in just a couple of minutes. All right, I'm back. So let me just the actual assessment. We'll have a look at from the view. Okay, so we've gone through quite a lot here. So let's have a look here at understanding personal rights and the rights of others. So this is from element 4, analyze the rights and obligations of creative practitioners. So the example that we have in this question, Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, TikTok, etc. Identify the platform and their own rules and evaluate whether this is a good platform for you to share your work as a professional. So it can be any kind of social media platform. It doesn't need to be one of those examples. I mentioned before Blue Thumb. Blue Thumb is a website where people sell their works. So even something like that, I would consider to be appropriate for this question, because there is there are elements of intellectual property and copyright that are involved in selling your artwork on a website like that. And then, so identify their own rules and give an answer about evaluating whether or not you think it's appropriate for you. Provide a summary of your legal rights as a creative professional. Provide a summary of the legal and moral obligations that you have to your clients and customers as a creative professional. Describe the professional and ethical standards you intend to uphold. Describe your boundaries and personal limitations. What actions could you take if someone crosses your professional boundaries or your legal rights? What are some measures you can take to protect yourself and your intellectual property? And what are some measures you can take to ensure the physical health and safety of yourself and those who might be working alongside you? So this one here, this one is relating to the social media platform. The rest of them, the rest of those questions are a little bit more general and maybe more appropriate to whatever your kind of creative practice is, or the direction that you find yourself heading in. I think most of those questions are sort of relatively straightforward, but what I would be interested in knowing, especially for those of you who are here, out of those questions, are there any that don't make sense? Like if you were being asked to provide an answer, are there any of those questions that you kind of think, yeah, actually, I don't know how I would answer that? Because if there are, then we can talk about answering those questions. So the first one, provide a summary of your legal rights as a creative professional. Does anyone have any questions about that, or would you find that difficult question to answer? You can read through the rest of them. Let me know if there are any there that you're wondering about. A little bit more next one there too. If everyone's feeling pretty comfortable about those questions, I feel like you'd be able to answer them. Let's take a look down there at the last one. What are some measures which you can take to protect yourself and your intellectual property as a creative professional? Can someone give me an answer to that question? Anyone? Give me an answer. What are some measures you can take to protect yourself and your intellectual property as a creative professional? I'll give you an answer. You can sign your work. That's one step that you can take if we're talking about artworks, if we're talking about like specific individual artworks. Signing your work is definitely a measure that you can take to protect your intellectual property and your rights. Sophia said watermarks. Yes, that's a really good one, especially if you're posting things on platforms, social media, putting a watermark on there. Very good idea. Here's a question for the group that I will put out there just to get a general idea of where our knowledge is at. In Australia, do you need to register your artwork for it to be copyrighted? Like, do you need to register your copyright on an artwork or an image that you produced, or do you automatically have copyright once you produce a work? Sophie's already said no. Even though I was halfway through the question, she already said no. Is there anyone else who disagrees? Is there anyone who thinks you need to register your copyright? We might not be sure. Sophie is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, the answer is no. You do not need to register your artwork. As soon as you produce your artwork, and as soon as you're finished with it, you put it out into the world, you have copyright on it automatically. Excellent. All right. So let's come back then to our slideshow here. So we're into evaluate and pursue professional opportunities. So having a little think about where can we find jobs and opportunities. And we did talk about this a little bit yesterday. So talking about like specifically looking for illustration jobs and also looking for teaching jobs and where to get some experience and opportunities there. Obviously, the industry that you're looking at, whichever part of the creative industry you're looking at, there will be different ways to find jobs and opportunities. But certainly a good starting point is putting yourself in environments where these professionals are working and making connections. So if you are wanting to move into the sort of fine art world, then definitely going to exhibitions, going to galleries, meeting gallery owners, meeting other artists. These are some of the places where you will find opportunities to network, opportunities to meet people, and then that can lead to opportunities to actually exhibiting yourself. But the same applies to any other kind of industry. So if we think about illustration, I mentioned that I did a short course on picture book writing, and that gave me a lot of information also about on picture book illustration, and also gave me the opportunity to meet other artists and to meet other people working within that field. There was also a period of time, not so much these days, but there was a period of time that I used to go to conventions a lot more. So I went to Comic-Con for a couple of years, actually had a stall at Comic-Con. And that can be an opportunity to, if you're more interested in kind of illustration in terms of things like graphic novels and comic book illustration, but also writers conventions, and writers and illustrators conventions. So the Writers Center, which is where I did my short course on picture books, that was through the Writers Center. I think I was struggling to remember the name of the place last week, and it's just popped straight into my head this week. Writers Center in Sydney. That is a good, they often run courses, they often run opportunities to meet and like to gather together and meet other authors and meet other illustrators. If we're talking about tattoos, then going to tattoo shops. And also there are conventions for that sort of thing too. So finding ways to be in and amongst the people who are already doing that work is a great way to find out more and to meet the people who are already working there. Then you can use job hunting platforms. There are, within creative industries, sometimes you will need to ask around and approach people who are not advertising a role to see if they can use your services. So sometimes people will advertise on job hunting platforms, but they might have very specific requirements for what they're after. So I would say that would be more appropriate if you were going into the sort of commercial fields relating to creative industries or art industries. So things like, I mentioned my friend who was a map painter earlier last week. So things like that, if you're working in advertising, working on movies, all those sorts of opportunities, then some of those will be advertised on places like Seek. But there is, I think, a certain amount of word of mouth that goes into these sorts of opportunities. So the more people that you know, the more chances are that someone's going to recommend you or mention an opportunity that might suit you. Obviously, exploit social media and advertise yourself as much as possible. That's very difficult. I absolutely get how difficult it is. I find it very difficult to maintain my own social media. But do what you can. Do as much as you can. And if you've got someone in your life who can help you with it and make it easier for you, absolutely ask for that person's help. And I mentioned as well last week, advertise your services, advertise your works for sale, say that you are open to commissions, you are open to opportunities. Because if you're not explicitly saying that, you might be surprised at how many people have been thinking about asking you to do something for them or hiring you, but they just think you're too busy, so they don't want to bother you. So if you make it explicit and really say, no, I'm very much available for this kind of commission, whatever it might be, you might be surprised at how much of a response you actually get to that. And the last one on that list is pretty important as well. Enter competitions, apply for residencies, apply for those sorts of opportunities. So I have a spreadsheet that is, as many kind of competitions and opportunities that I'm aware of and I've researched and I've found online. And I put in what are the dates that those competitions and so on, and those opportunities, what dates they finish, what are the requirements, is it a landscape prize or is it a portrait prize or whatever. And the more you do research, the more you might find that actually not all prizes are going to be appropriate to your style of work. There's quite a few prizes that are very focused on modern works, and you might be more of a traditional artist, and that's fine. You don't need to try and enter everything. But if you've got a selection of, say, 10 to 15 prizes per year that your goal is to enter maybe 5 of those, then that's a really good starting place, and that's a really good goal. You might not be able to get you might not be a finalist in any of those prizes. Even over the course of a couple of years, you might not be the finalist. But it's worth giving yourself that goal, and it's worth continuing to enter them. And also any entry fees, there's usually entry fees for prizes and things. Any entry fees are also tax deductible. So keep that in your mind too. In terms of if you are seeking out new opportunities, I'd say some of this is fairly kind of standard stuff. And to be fair, it's also pretty broad. Like, we could apply a lot of this to most jobs that you'd be applying for. So having an up-to-date resume, having an up-to-date portfolio, having a cover letter, a strong cover letter, having your references together, do work experience, look at job interview details. So do you need a working with children check, police background check, first aid qualifications, driver's license, etc. And look up professionals you admire using online platforms and see what qualifications they might have that you might need as well. So as I say, that's some pretty general advice. But even so, even the things like the resume, the portfolio, the cover letter, as an illustrator, I have all of those. and I've had to use all of those to get work. I'm just going to see if I can find my resume, just so that you can have a look at that. Just trying to think what I've put it under. Got 2 resumes. Got martial arts resume too. It's not up to date anymore. Let me have a look here. Just stop share because that's my Sydney Art School one. Let me just see here. I can find. That's really old. It's only another computer. Here we go. Let me just open that. So this is my resume. This is, I think, from a couple of years ago. So I don't think it's up to date. Yeah, there you go. So it only goes up to 2020. Oh wow, that's really not up to date. Okay, I've got to do this again more recently. But here's an example. This is what my resume looked like from a couple of years ago. And this is for illustration projects. So this is a resume that I sent out to different publishers when I wanted to update them on sort of where I was at in terms of works that I produced and so on. I then also attached select illustrations. So these were all for Wombat Books, who I've worked with a number of times, and so on. So there's like a selection of illustrated works in my resume as well. So that was just a little PDF under 10 megabytes, which is what a lot of them required. And that just gives you an example of both the resume and cover letter, which I would periodically kind of send out to different publishers. So no matter what kind of opportunity you're looking for, there's probably a good chance that you need something like that. And as with that example, I know I do actually have another resume that's a little bit more up to date, but I just can't find it right now. I would keep your resume up to date. So even if you're not planning on sending things out, there are competitions and there are residencies that want to know what have you entered, what have you been a finalist in, what have you won in terms of prizes and what have you. Or if you're looking at illustration, they want to see what works have you produced, who have you worked with previously, all of that kind of information. So it's worth keeping yourself up to date as much as your resume, like making sure that you're keeping a record of things, because in my experience anyway, it's very easy to forget. It's easy to forget what you have done, what you've won, what you entered, you know, what you were a finalist in. Some things will stick out, but then there'll be other things you'll be like, oh yeah, that's right, I did enter that and I did get in. So keep some kind of record, even if it's just a spreadsheet. Make sure you've got a record so you can keep it up to date. All right. Thinking a little bit about job seeking. So a traditional method of job seeking, job websites. So if we're looking at different job opportunities that you might be able to go for, let's have a look at those. So this is one, oh, accidentally closed it. Obviously it's hard to keep these kind of references up to date because you know, jobs come and go pretty fast. But this is an example that we sort of mentioned, I even mentioned last week, talking about paint and sip opportunities. So this is a teaching opportunity from a traditional website, from Indeed, paint and sip lead art instructor. It's in Victoria, but there are plenty of places in Sydney that are also doing similar things. So this is a sort of job opportunity that you might find on a traditional kind of website. It gives us a full description, so rate of pay, what we're looking for, can you read the room, and like any relationship, here are non-negotiables. What's interesting with these sorts of jobs, as I said, that they're not necessarily looking for a lot of experience, but what they are looking for is a lot of personality and good skills, good artistic skills as well. If we have a look then at an international job listing example, here's an example of a tattoo artist. So that's another sort of job or stream that we've mentioned. Now, with this one, they will give you some more information about what they're looking for. Please add Instagram links so we can see your tattoo work. We're not hiring apprentices, only experienced artists. They give you, you know, how much pay, blah, 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 and a bit of an overview of what they're looking for. So in the traditional kind of world, there are definitely ways that you can go about finding jobs through job websites. I would say that a lot of those sort of, it's pretty limited, I think, in creative fields. So if we're thinking then about, well, how else are we going to find jobs? What are some other sort of modern or emerging technologies or ways that might help you seek work or find clients? Can you think of some ways? Give me some answers.
Social media.
Social media. So we've already talked about that one a bit. Just flat out advertising your availability on social media. Definitely. If we're thinking about social media, though, that's one way to sort of utilize social media, is just straightforwardly advertising your availability. But what would be some other ways that you can use social media to seek work or get clients or otherwise make money?
I've actually I follow an artist on Instagram, and he has a quite different view. So he studied in US his arts, and then he moved back to India, and he has branded his works around so well that he has and he branded it on Instagram so well that now different brands, even the perfume brands, want to collaborate with him. And yeah, he's doing really well. And his target was Bollywood. That's like something like Hollywood. And so, and his targeting, and so he's become very clear what is my target audience, and so he's really attracting good branding I mean, good collaborators and exhibition opportunities, and he's having a more mark making. Yeah, he went all out to, and his works are really good. It's I feel they're very unique. They have a very different combination of the present and the current, and he stresses on that. I mean, he emphasizes on that. So that's a kind of marketing he has done and around his work, and made it quite unique. And he stick to his likes for carpets, and he stick to it across all his works. So he's doing really well. And there's an opposite version of artist. She's Nilisha JP, and she has won some awards in the art world in India. And her work is very, it speaks a lot. But yeah, she doesn't do much marketing. She posts consistently and very unique works, and she's also doing really well. So it's so much, whatever we are doing on social media, it's so much is associated with our personality, because our works also will reflect that, and how much we are ready to go. I think that's when the opportunities fall in as per what speaks to you, because the moment you're choosing this career, that itself means that you want to make a choice of what you want to work on. So I think,
yeah, I think it's certainly fair to say that if you can sort of find your niche and utilize social media, that direct opportunities will come from that. And as you say, you can end up with people wanting to collaborate with you, and use your work, in whatever it is they're doing. So yeah, that's certainly another way to make money off of what you're doing. Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Good examples. I think another thing too that you can think about is, things like subscription services, things like Patreon, or even monetizing videos from things like YouTube, or from Discord. Those are also sort of more modern opportunities that people can use to make money. So those are also things that you can look at, because I do know a few artists who are doing reasonably well doing that. One of them sort of set up a Patreon, so he's got monthly subscribers. He's a teacher as well, an art teacher. And then coinciding with that, he's also got a YouTube account that has enough followers now that he can monetize some of that. So any little income stream that's coming from, these social media kind of outlets or these online digital platforms, it all adds up, and it can all be very useful.